I'm glad that you're joining us. This is probably going to be the second part of a multi-part, hopefully, if I get myself motivated to get it done, series about record keeping on the homestead and homesteading head first. In other words, knowing what you're doing, learning what you're doing, and keeping track of what you're doing in your head before you physically do it and make giant mistakes and regrets. You don't want to have any regrets. I'm just starting this off again. As you see, I'm still in the same position as I was before in my last video. If you didn't see the last video, you really want to check that out because it was long and yappy. But I'm just going to let you guys know some of the things that I did when we were first starting out as far as record keeping. I'm kind of a paper person, and when you're doing, you know, your homesteading thing or your gardening thing or whatever, the first thing you do, typically speaking, is you get a nice little notebook. And this is actually my husband's nice little notebook right now, but you get a notebook, and what I did was I was all excited because, you know, I have all this, you know, blank pages of paper, you know, they're just blank paper right there, and whew, it's just an endless possibility. And I'm also a doodler, so I would take my little pencil and I would start doodling, you know, and I would make garden plans. You know, that's where it all kind of started with me anyways, gardening. I'd make garden plans, and I would say, well, I want to grow tomatoes and, you know, all this stuff, and I had all these great long lists of things that I was going to grow, and, you know, of those great long lists, I would grow like one or two things maybe successfully because I had very limited space. But it started in this plan. And back in the olden days, when I was young and full of energy and crazy as a pet coon, I had plans that, you know, now that I was married, I was going to get this big farm, and I was going to build our house, and we were going to, you know, I was going to live the Mother Earth News dream. I was going to, you know, be off grid, and we were going to chop our own wood and have a wood lot. We were going to have all these animals and all this stuff, and have, you know, acres and acres and acres of food, and my whole family was going to get out there with a hoe and dig away and just be great. And I put all of it in my notebooks. It was just so much fun. It was just total delusional dreaming. And looking back, I see that's what it was. It was just like, oh my gosh, you know, you would have to be and my husband, you know, Killjoy, he would always go, you realize that I work in a city? And I'm like, yeah. Well, you realize that if you make a circle around the city within an hour's drive, that, you know, and this is like 1980 prices, he's like, you know, property is going for, you know, $14,000 an acre. And, you know, at that time, I think he was making $4.86 an hour, which sounds like, oh my gosh, really? But that's how much he was making, and that was actually good money because it was more than minimum, and he had a job where he had insurance. I mean, he had an actually good job. You know, he still got the same job. All these years later, he's still working at the same place, so, you know, it's a good job. But it's not a job where two people, one of them who's 21 and one of them who's 17, are going to go out and buy, you know, 150 acres at $14,000 an acre and have time to both work full-time and build a house from scratch from the trees you find on the acreage that you purchased at this exorbitant rate, be able to make payments on it, because, you know, we were barely making the payments we had to make on our apartment at the time. We had food in our stomachs at the grocery store. If we went to the cheap grocery store and watched what we were getting, yeah, it was pretty outlandish dream. And that's where it all started, was these crazy insanity notebooks. And I would pore over notebooks, and I would read. I would read everything. Like I said, I was a subscriber to Mother Earth News, and I would read them, you know, and I would take everything. Oh, well, you know, I don't need to buy a chicken feeder. All I need is a milk jug and an old lid to a can, you know, and I can make a chicken feeder. And you can do it. You can. It's possible. But it's really not that practical. Not in the long run. I mean, people do it, but there's a reason chicken feeders are made out of the materials they're made out of. There's a reason they're designed the way they are, because that design works. And, you know, you may need to buy a new chicken feeder that may cost, you know, $10. And then you have to come up with $10. So all those things, there's a practical part to it. When we were first starting out and young and dumb and whatnot, one of the first things I talked him into, and I talked him into it wholeheartedly 100%, is meat chickens. Believe it or not, that was one of the first, besides our little garden, the first projects that we did as a family was these meat chickens. And we, his parents had like a half acre and lived kind of out enough of town that, you know, meat chickens would not be a crazy thing. And their neighbors actually had chickens, so it was okay. And his mom and dad had a garden spot. So I decided we were going to get these. I think we started with 25 meat chickens that I ordered. And I had raised chickens as a child in my past, so I knew about chickens. I wasn't a bare beginner. And I was just convincing him this will be well worth our time and our effort and our money. So we built this coop, and I'm using that term extremely loosely, based on my building design as somebody who had never hooked much together at all. I mean, I helped my family build our barn, so I thought I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know anything about designing anything that would actually stand up. And, you know, got some plywood and built this coop thing and kept the chickens in it and fed them, and they ran around my mother-in-law's backyard. And we actually, you know, she kind of had known people that had raised chickens and cleaned them, and so we were actually able to get some chicken meat from these chickens that we raised. So that was great. You know, we had a success. And the worst thing you can do when you're starting out is have one success that's decent. So the next time we were going to do 50 chickens in this chicken coop, and that went a little bit different. The first chickens we raised, we didn't feed them right. That was one problem that we had, and I was going to correct that problem. And those first chickens that were our first success, they were pretty skinny. I mean, even for meat chickens, they were just kind of skinny and scrawny, and they really weren't that developed because I didn't know anything about nutrition for chickens. And I was trying to, you know, get food where I could and do a lot of scraps and stuff, just trying to do it as cheap as I possibly could. The second batch of chickens that we did, the 50, I'd done more research, more learning, and we knew how to feed them, and we knew how to treat them, and they were doing great. They were just doing, I mean, they were amazing. They were getting big and fat and just like, you know, Cornish rock chickens should get. They were doing everything they're supposed to do. And we had planned to butcher our 50 chickens the next weekend, I believe it was. And they were big chickens. They were nice, beautiful chickens. And on the Thursday of the week, the Saturday that we were going to butcher the chickens, because we had off work to do it, on that Thursday, the neighbor's dog got over to our little pen, and he broke into the chicken pen, and he reached in the coop, and he just bit all the chickens. He just bit them, and bit them, and bit them, and bit them, and bit them. And when we got off work, we came home, and there were 50, probably 6-pound meat chickens, dead, flies swarming around them, hard, and we got no chickens because the neighbor's dog had killed every one of them. And I wept. It was horrible. So then I had to convince him that we had to take that loss because we put the feed in it, we spent the money on the coop, and I had to convince him to try to do it again. And it was a game I lost. I couldn't convince him to do it again at that point in time. So that was one of our first successes and one of our first big losses. And that just kind of opens your eyes into the whole world of homesteading and why you have to keep records and why it's so important to know what you got, to know where you're going, and to have a plan. So I'm going to take you along and I'm going to show you, because as it went on, these little notebooks, they weren't cutting it. Because what would happen is I would do all these great and grandiose plans, and I'd put them in this little notebook, and then I wouldn't write it in anymore, and I wouldn't keep track of anything, and I wouldn't know, wow, I don't know how much food I'd fed those chickens before they died. I knew the first time how much money I spent on the plywood, but I didn't know anything else about it. And then I got into, it was grief. That's why I couldn't convince him to do it, to try it again. Being lesser people, we probably would have given up, but we're not. We're go on. And as things have gone on, I've learned easier ways to do things. I went from plain lined paper to grid paper to graph paper. And colored pencils. Colored pencils was another thing that really helped me, because then I could organize, and I had a notebook and I had little flaps so that I could keep track of everything, and I would always start out great, and I'd have all these, you know, best laid plans, and then they would all go down south. What started me off and helped me get going was getting our first computer, because I like to diddle on the computer. It was easier to make the lines and graphs, and when I would mess them up, I wouldn't have to tear up the whole page and start completely over. I could just shift things around a little bit, and to me that was like, it made me happier, and it was a better use of my time. So the first thing I started to do was I started to learn, and I'm completely self-taught computers wise, so I had to learn how to do like Excel, to do a spreadsheet, and I had to learn that it's okay to like type on a, you know, something and save it. And you know, at first we started off with like an Apple IIc computer, so there wasn't a lot of fancy to it. Our first Windows computer was better. As we go on and we go on and you learn, same thing, same progression, and technology got better and things get easier and easier. Thing is, there's still a place for paper records. And what this little weird thing is my best use of keeping track of my feed that I use for the year. And I've tried other things. I've tried putting it in computers and so forth and so forth. This works for me. Maybe not work for you, but it works for me. I have every year an envelope, this nice little manila envelope, and it says on it 2020 feed bills. And then, because I've had experience now for 40 years, I know the basic things that I buy for my animals. And I hope that you can see this and read this. But like, this first part says scratch. And this part says shavings. And this part says 15% layer feed. And yes, the percent of protein in your feed is important to keep track of. Because this one says 20% poultry feed. And this one says, well, somewhere, 24% poultry feed. Is this one. And each of these has their little box, and you can see that there's a price. Like this first one I have right here is scratch grain was $9.99. I know I buy it in a 50-pound bag. I hope you can see this. This sun coming in here is not making things easy, I don't think. But I know I buy it in a 50-pound bag. Typically, I shop at Tractor Supply, Orscheln's, one of the two. Orscheln sells things in smaller bags. That's a feed store by us. Tractor Supply is pretty much a national company. But that's the farm store we go to. And I write it down, my basic envelope, and it's got two sides. I try to take every little space I can keep. I have spaces for things like meds. I have a space for dog food, which even though I don't consider our dogs part of the Homestead budget, I still do keep track of how much dog food I buy every year. Hay, I have a place for hay. And what this is this is my first draft. This is my records. And when I bought this scratch grain, how many days ago was it? Let me look. Because when I'm buying feed, I keep my receipts also. And I maybe don't keep them forever, but I try to keep them until they're on this paper. This is my trade. I have piles of this, and they go to this. And then I take from this point, and it goes onto a place on the computer, which I will show you later. But this day, which was the 15th of January, 2020, I purchased 2 bags of scratch grain. The scratch grain is costing $9.99 currently at our Tractor Supply for 50 pounds. And I have 2 tally marks. That does not take me very long. When I have it recorded on the receipt, I will check mark it, so I know I've recorded that thing onto my envelope. I keep this envelope in a certain spot on top of my messy desk. And this envelope I keep for 1 year. At the end of the year, I total up how much feed I'm feeding for animals. I can total it any time if I need to, but I usually do it my year-end totals. Okay, that's my first thing. After these are recorded, you can either stick them inside of the envelope and keep them. And if you're doing this as a business, you do need to keep these so that you can have receipts for all of your expenses if you're actually doing this as a business. Since we're not actually doing this as a business, and I don't do a whole bunch of real complicated tax things, where you're trying to take losses and whatever. I don't do that. I just, if I make money, I end up putting the money in as money made doing this on my taxes. I don't have all the, it's a whole business, a real business, just because this is just a side thing for our family. But keep it if you need it for your taxes. Keep those receipts, okay? And they can just go in there. I put any vet receipts, vet bills, if I have, where I get a fecals done or I buy, dewormer or shots or anything, they go in there. It's just a place to keep it. That's why I have an envelope. But if not, if I feel like I've got everything I need off of that receipt, I can put the receipt in the trash at that point. But this is step 1. This is my feed envelope. Okay? And it's a very valuable thing for my family. So, this is the first step. So, see you in the next step.